On a Tuesday in July, I bought a lemon tree I didn't need. It was sitting in front of a hardware store in Los Angeles, leaves shining like they had their own small ideas about the morning. I went in for light bulbs and a roll of tape, and I came out carrying a 4-foot tree with a plastic pot and a tag that said Eureka in cheerful letters. The cashier wished me luck like I'd adopted a puppy. I strapped the pot into the passenger seat of my old Civic with the seatbelt, and we drove home through Koreatown together, my new tree nodding shyly at every stoplight. The car smelled like a clean kitchen, like a promise. I told myself I'd only see if it fit on the balcony. If it didn't, I'd take it back, no harm done. I told myself a lot of things that morning. My balcony was the size of a bathtub and already crowded. There was a folding chair that pinched my leg if I sat wrong. There was a stubborn basil plant that acted brave and then went limp twice a week. There was a small, wobbly table I'd rescued from the curb and painted the color of a mint gum wrapper. I stood the lemon tree in the corner, where the railing caught the sun at an angle, and I watched the leaves shimmer. For a while I did nothing except watch. The city kept talking to itself below, delivery trucks grumbling, a man selling pilettes in a friendly bell rhythm, a bus sighing, while my new tree tried on its spot like a jacket. My downstairs neighbor, Mr. Ruiz, leaned over from his balcony. He wore a Dodgers cap and the relaxed smile of a man who had lived in the building long enough to know the good plugs and the noisy pipes. "Citrus," he said. "Lemon," I said, as if we were talking about a puppy's breed. He nodded. "They like company. Talk to it. And don't drown it. People drown their trees thinking it's love." I promised not to drown it. After he went back inside, I touched the soil like you touch the forehead of a sleeping kid. It felt damp and cool. There were no lemons yet, just glossy leaves and one tiny bud like a closed eyelid. I lifted the pot and turned it a quarter. I sat in the folding chair and ate a piece of toast dry and plain, because the only thing I wanted on it was the future idea of lemon. In the afternoons, heat swam up from the street. The balcony faced west, so from 3 to 6 the sun came in strong, the kind of light that makes honest people squint. I taped a note inside my cupboard, "Water Wednesday," like the tree had joined my calendar. On Wednesday, I poured a liter around the trunk and counted slowly to 20. The leaves tasted the air with a light shake. I found myself telling the tree about little things, how I had finally fixed the loose handle on the bathroom door, how my boss had started using the phrase "quick win" like it was a seasoning he sprinkled on meetings. I did not know what I expected from talking, but I liked the way my voice sounded with the traffic, like two instruments trying to find the same key. Around the third week, I bumped into my upstairs neighbor in the stairwell. She was carrying a box of Tupperware without lids and moving like she had one more flight to go. I held the door. She thanked me and looked past me toward my balcony. "You're the lemon guy," she said. "I guess I am," I said. It surprised me how proud I felt. Her name was Tasha. She worked nights at the hospital in Hollywood and liked to leave her shoes in the hallway, which the landlord hated. She had a laugh that came out in bursts, like shaking dice. "My grandma had a Meyer lemon in Stockton," she said. "She used to make little jars of lemon sugar and wrap them in napkins for church." "Lemon sugar," I repeated, as if that was a place you could visit. She told me to watch for the Santa Ana winds. "They'll knock the whole city sideways if you don't tie it down," she said, and then she tapped the box with her chin and climbed the rest of the stairs. I Googled how to tie down a lemon tree on a small balcony and fell into a hole about soil aeration and drainage and microclimates. I learned that the concrete of the building warmed the roots at night, and that the mint-colored table might reflect enough heat to matter. I learned that spiders are friends, and that yellow leaves are sometimes a cry for magnesium, which sounded dignified and medical. I bought a bag of citrus fertilizer that smelled like the opposite of a promise and stirred a handful into the pot while the pigeons watched with the judgment of history. I found two old bungee cords in the trunk of my car and hooked them through the railing, the rubber humming when I pulled. The tree stood up a little straighter, like it had made a plan with me. One night in August, a helicopter drew a bright rectangle on my wall and hung there, and then the rectangle slid away. I stood barefoot on the balcony. The city was a soft, shining mess. I could hear frying pans, a distant radio, a dog with something urgent to say. The lemon leaves were still. For a long moment, I felt like the whole building and my small life inside it was being held in a cupped hand. I went to bed thinking about the lemon sugar that did not exist yet and slept harder than I had in months. On Sunday, I drove to a nursery in Culver City and bought a heavier pot, one with little feet that lifted it off the ground so water could wander out politely. The clerk helped me load a bag of soil into the trunk and told me about his avocado that refused to fruit, like a musician who would only rehearse. Back home, I slid the lemon gently into the new pot and patted soil around it like tucking in a sweater. Dirt got under my nails. Someone on the sidewalk called up, "Looking good, lemon guy." I waved and felt silly and pleased. When I went inside to wash my hands, I caught my face in the mirror and saw a man who looked rested by something small. It was a surprise. It was exactly the size of a lemon. The first flower opened in September. It was white and neat, and it smelled like a secret you'd trust a child with. I bent closer. The bud near it twitched like it was practicing. The city kept talking, and the tree, a quiet, green newcomer, began its slow way toward becoming real fruit in a place where every day already felt too full. I checked my cupboard note and smiled. Wednesday wasn't the only day I remembered to care, but it was the day I counted to 20 and counting. It turned out, felt like a kind of prayer I could believe in. By October, I knew the sun's schedule better than my own. At 3:12, a sliver of light cut the railing. By 3:45, the pot warmed and sent up a baked earth smell I started calling balcony soup. I learned the sound of thirsty soil, the way water hits and disappears like it's gone down a secret hatch. I learned the look of the leaves when the day was too much for them, and how the whole tree seemed to relax after dusk, the way the city does after the radio hosts switch from the news to soft songs. On my way home from work, I stopped buying any groceries that didn't feel like they could stand next to lemon. Even my coffee felt hopeful, like a string that could pull morning up over the edge. One afternoon, a gust tried to push the whole thing over. The tree rocked. I lunged, catching the trunk with my forearm. Soil sloshed over my shoes. I said, "Hey, hey," as if it was a person at the top of a step. And isn't that what it was? Something that had climbed into my life and needed a hand. "Mister." Ruiz popped out with a coil of rope and moved in the slow, exact rhythm of a man who has saved many things from falling. We added a third line to the railing. "Storm season," he said, and I nodded like I'd always known. The morning after, I found a tiny green bead where one flower had been. I touched it with my fingernail, careful, like hiding a secret under the tongue. A lemon the size of a pearl. The world does this sometimes. Leaves you alone for months, then taps your shoulder and says, "Look." I set my phone by the pot and recorded the sound of the street, which felt like part of the story now. When I played it back later, there was something else in the track, the soft shift of leaves, like the tree had spoken in a language only microphones hear. In November, Tasha came down with a jar. "I tried the lemon sugar," she said, "but with store lemons. Waiting on yours." Inside the jar was a glitter of yellow like tiny windows. We spooned a little over yogurt and ate leaning against the railing. The city tasted brighter for a minute. A siren went by, and then a skateboard clacked down the sidewalk, and the two sounds braided together into something that meant We live here. Thanksgiving, I drove to Glendale to see my father. He moved slow these days, like someone who was walking through shallow water. We watched football with the sound low and ate turkey that tasted the way turkey always tastes, like tradition showing up even if you didn't confirm. I told him about the lemon tree. He smiled, and the smile reached his eyes. Your grandfather had one in his yard in El Paso, he said. He used to rub the leaves and put his hands to his face when he came in from work. My father lifted his hands into the air in the small living room and sniffed them, memory making a pretend. When I left, he pressed a stack of plastic takeout containers into my hands like I was leaving for a long trip. He didn't need to say anything about coming by more often. The room had already said it. Back home, the lemon bead had a twin. I held my phone light to them at night. It was a simple, foolish joy, the kind that makes you both embarrassed and grateful. The city was gearing up for its holidays, curling lights around palm trees, and playing the same songs in every store, so the doors all rhymed. I added a new note inside my cupboard. Don't forget to live a little. It was corny, but so are most truths that work. When rain finally came, it came honest. The tree drank like it had been waiting for clean water, the bungees humming softly. I made soup I hadn't planned to make. I ironed a shirt I would probably not wear. The lemons swelled from pearl to olive, from olive to egg. I kept touching them with the back of my finger, superstition asking permission. And somewhere in there, the tree stopped being a guest and started being a roommate who paid rent in small, scented coins that were not yet spendable, but getting there. I woke to wind and glass and the wrong kind of silence. It was January, the month Los Angeles sometimes remembers it can be dramatic. I stepped onto the balcony in socked feet and felt cold water find my toes. The lemon tree had fallen against the railing, bungees stretched like tired mouths. The pot had tipped, and a chunk of soil lay on the mint-green table like a cake that gave up. One of the small lemons was hanging by a thread of stem, turning gently like a planet deciding something. For a second I froze, the way people do when something dear is hurt and the brain tries to print out instructions but jams. Then I moved. I set my shoulder under the trunk and eased the pot upright. I held it with my hip and used my free hand to scoop clumsy handfuls of soil back into place, pressing down the way a barber pats a finished haircut. My breath made small clouds. My heart hammered at a speed usually reserved for stress or love. I tightened the bungees. I made a loop of rope around the middle like a belt. The lemon hung there, asking me to choose. A drop of water ran down my wrist and disappeared into my sleeve. I took a breath that felt like the first one anyone had ever taken and pinched the stem free. I cupped the tiny fruit in my palm. It was heavier than it looked, which I decided was a good sign for anything in life. When the wind moved on, it left a hum I could feel in the railing. I went inside and set the small lemon on the counter like a trophy made by a child, imperfect and important. I made coffee and stood looking at it. The coffee had a brave smell. The lemon had no smell at all yet. It was hard to tell if it was ready for the world or just ready for a story, and I didn't want to rush either one. Days later, the tree looked less shaken. The dirt crusted over into a respectable surface again. The little lemon on the counter rolled a bit each time the freezer motor kicked on, bumping the cutting board, reminding me that patience was not the same as neglect. I touched the leaves and listened for the sound I had learned to trust, that faint paper whisper that said we were still in this together. I told the tree it had done great in the storm. Maybe it believed me. I tried to believe me too. February tipped into March with a soft click. I kept the balcony tidy like an apology. I washed the wobbly table and considered sanding it. The building settled around us with the gentle complaining of old bones. Sometimes I caught Mr. Ruiz humming to himself in Spanish and felt lucky to be living near someone who hummed. Sometimes Tasha came down with a mug of tea and a set of tired eyes, and we watched the last light walk down the street. She called the lemons our building's project, and I tried not to assign too much meaning to that, even though meaning tends to push its way in, like mint in a cracked sidewalk. One Saturday, I took the small lemon from the counter and set it in the palm of my hand, weighing choice. It was the size of a ping-pong ball now, still more green than yellow, but with a blush like it had been thinking about the sun. I sliced a simple round and licked it. It was sour and sharp and young, like a remark from a smart kid. I laughed out loud in my kitchen, which was not something I did often. I squeezed the rest into a glass and filled it with water and ice. It wasn't lemonade, I didn't add sugar, but it was mine, and I drank it standing barefoot on the tile, leaning against the counter that had a burn mark from a previous renter's pan. The drink woke up parts of my tongue I hadn't visited since summer. It tasted like a plan finally shaking hands with the day. The next week, the other lemons went yellow without asking permission. They did that thing plants do, practice in secret, then show up fully formed like, what? This is how I've always been. I twisted one gently, felt the stem give with a private click, and held in my hand an actual lemon I could not deny. I brought it to my nose. Now it smelled like all the kitchens I'd loved, like clean cutting boards and bright afternoons. I set it on the mint green table and took a picture that made the table look braver than it was. My father called that night. He asked if I could drive to Glendale on Sunday to help him look at his water heater. It was probably fine, he said, but he wanted company while it was probably fine. I told him I'd be there. After I hung up, I put the lemon into a paper bag with a gentle kind of ceremony and set the bag by the door. I wasn't sure what we'd do with it. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. It felt like carrying a sentence I was ready to say. On Sunday, the water heater was indeed fine. We stood next to it like two men visiting a sculpture of a pipe. My father told me a story about my grandfather again, the same one about rubbing the leaves, and this time he added a detail. After smelling his hands, my grandfather always whistled one bar of the same song from the radio, for no reason anyone could ever explain. My father tried to whistle and got halfway there. I took the lemon from the bag and placed it next to the sink. We didn't cut it. We didn't need to. We just left it there, and it made the kitchen look like someone had plans. Driving home, the late sun on the 5 made the city look like it had spent the day at the beach. I rolled down the window. Air slipped in with its complicated flavors, hot breaks, warm dust, a little ocean, a little food truck. I felt young and not young at the same time, which is to say I felt honest. At a light, I glanced at the passenger seat. There was a faint print of yellow on the paper bag, like the lemon had leaned against it and signed its name. At home, I sliced the second lemon and made pasta with too much garlic and a confident squeeze. I ate on the balcony with my feet on the railing. The sky went from blue to the exact color of the mint table. The leaves made their kind paper noise. I thought about all the things I didn't buy that year, and how this one thing I did buy had found a way to take up room without taking anything away. The city kept talking to itself, the good, ordinary music of it. I counted, not water this time, but something else, an easy inventory of what was here. A chair that pinched if you sat wrong, a table that pretended to be brave, a tree that had learned our weather, a man who could now taste his days a little better. It felt like enough. It felt, for once, like plenty. In April, I put a small handwritten sign on the lobby table. Free lemons. Please take one. And then, because I couldn't help myself, I added, be kind to whatever you're growing. I set a bowl there on Saturday morning and went upstairs to make coffee. By noon the bowl was empty. Mrs. Grant from 3C knocked on my door holding a lemon like it was a rare egg. I'm making tea, she said. This will be a story to tell my sister. She had lived in the building longer than most of the appliances. I gave her a second lemon for her sister, and she winked at me like we'd started a light kind of conspiracy. A day later, there were two sticky notes on my door. One had a drawing of a lemon with big cartoon muscles. The other said, in neat all caps, "Thank you for bright things." I stuck both notes inside the cupboard, next to Water Wednesday and Don't Forget to Live a Little. My kitchen looked like a guidance counselor who specialized in produce. I liked it. It turned into a small routine. On Saturdays, if the tree was feeling generous, I put out a bowl. People in the building began to greet me by holding up their hands in a little pinch twist motion, the international sign for, "How's the lemon situation?" I learned that the boy in 4A had a science fair project about plants, and he brought his mother to the balcony so I could explain bungee cords and drainage holes like a man with a degree in balcony. I learned that Mr. Ruiz made a lemon chicken he had once sold from a cart in East L.A. And now he brought me a plate hot enough to make me stand over the sink and blow. I learned that Tasha's night shift sometimes smoothed itself out when she had something simple to look forward to, like slicing a lemon over a bowl of strawberries before bed. She said it felt like turning on a light you could eat. One Friday evening, I found an envelope in my mailbox with my name in tidy cursive. Inside was a postcard from someone who had moved out months earlier, a guy named Nate who used to practice guitar by the window. "I missed the sound of your leaves," the postcard said. And then, smaller, weird, right? I held the card like it might drip. I looked up at my balcony, at the tree leaning into its corner like a shy friend in a crowded room. I hadn't thought of the leaves as part of the building's sound. Now I couldn't stop hearing them. My father started calling more, and I started driving to Glendale without needing a reason. We found reasons anyway. A sticky door, an expired coupon, a basketball game he wanted to not watch alone. On one Sunday, I showed up with a paper bag holding 2 lemons and a little jar of sugar I'd mixed with zest. We shook the jar like maracas and laughed. He said my grandfather wouldn't believe we were making dessert from the air off a tree in the sky. I told him the tree wasn't exactly in the sky. He said, "Close enough," and whistled half the song again. In May, Tasha knocked and handed me a plate with a slice of cake the exact yellow of a thoughtful afternoon. "Lemon loaf," she said. If my grandma were alive, she would roll her eyes at the name and then take the biggest slice. We ate on the steps because the hallway was cooler than the apartments. She told me a story about a patient who had asked her to hold his hand at 3 in the morning and how the room had gotten quiet in a way that wasn't sad. "There are moments where you can feel the day change shape," she said. I nodded. I knew about shape changing. I had a citrus degree. The tree, for its part, went on with its business, which was to say it went on becoming itself. New leaves arrived like small, folded letters. Old ones let go and spun out toward the street, landing on car hoods and jogging paths and once, miraculously, on the brim of a man's hat. I watched him lift it like a coin from a fountain and look up at the building. I wanted to shout down, "It's a friendly tree," but I didn't. He tucked the leaf in his pocket and kept walking, carrying a tiny piece of shade with him. Summer swung back. Heat wrote its name on everything. I carried a Mr. Bottle outside and spritzed the leaves like a low-budget spa. The tree wore water the way some people wear jewelry, without thinking too hard about it. I bought a new folding chair that didn't pinch and felt, stupidly, like I had just solved a big problem. The mint green table, fading now in a handsome way, held a bowl of limes as well as lemons, because a neighbor on the next block had a tree that had clearly signed a lease with abundance. Fruit traded hands in the building like books or stories. What had started on a Tuesday in July now had a beat, and I could count on it the way you count on streets to meet at corners. Late one night, when the air felt like cool water, I sat with my feet up and listened to the leaves. It was simple. It was small. It was everything. The traffic was a soft river. The city was both too big and exactly sized. I pressed my fingertips together and felt the citrus oil I hadn't fully washed away after the last harvest. I rubbed my hands and lifted them to my face the way my grandfather had, in a kitchen I only know through my father's mouth. The smell was bright and honest. Somewhere upstairs, a laugh tilted down the stairwell. Somewhere inside me, a stubborn, complicated feeling softened into something easy. I was growing something, and in a quiet, ordinary way, it was growing me back. A breeze moved through and turned a page that didn't exist. I didn't need to take a picture. I didn't need to make a post. I didn't need to make it more than it was. The lemon tree clicked its leaves together like a polite audience. The city kept its conversation going. And in the blue hour before sleep, I let myself feel proud of the kind of life where a small tree on a small balcony could become a headline. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was steady. The night didn't answer. It didn't have to. A single new blossom opened somewhere behind the leaves, and it was enough to know it had.